So I'll just jump into the presentation as I mentioned. We're going to follow on from where we left off last time. What I would like to give you is a brief overview of the session on the 6th of May, which is this Friday. Same place, same time, 3:30 to 5. So we don't plan to take any longer in case there are super, heated discussions and some of the groups would want to spend a little bit more time. I think we can add another 10 or 15 minutes, but actually we're trying to stick to the allotted time. We're going to have 3 exciting guest speakers with quite different focuses, which I just want to introduce briefly and give you an overview of. There's obviously going to be a more elaborate and detailed introduction on Friday. The idea is that we have each of these speakers talk for about 10 to 15 minutes. We've been aiming at 15 minutes. Maybe it's going to take a little bit longer, but then we have at least 5 minutes of time for an sort of an individual Q&A, an individual discussion in relation to each of those talks. And then we also have a little bit of time to discuss across the 3 talks. Plus, there's also going to be room for questions and discussions around your presentations, as I already mentioned, right? So don't worry too much. We'll have today to do that within the working groups, and then we have this joint session where we can still address some issues that we might have, right? So our first speaker is going to be Amélie Vermeer, who is at the University of Heidelberg. She works for High Innovation, which is the startup and incubation center at the university. She's going to talk a little bit about that, and at the same time, she herself is an entrepreneur who founded the organization Spoontainable. You see a screenshot here on the right. Those are sort of edible spoons. So it is sort of an environmental eco startup. And I think it's going to be quite interesting to have this combined focus from someone who's an entrepreneur and who's also active in sort of educating or supporting students who want to found an organization, right? So that's going to be a perspective from Heidelberg, but I think that applies to all of the universities that are participating. The second speaker is going to be Tatiana Tsarkova from Enactus Mannheim. Enactus is a student group, a student association that is focusing on social entrepreneurship and sustainable entrepreneurship. They're quite active, so you see that already, right? In the screenshot as well. 15 projects since they've been founded. They have over 800 members, and I think they have been, well, I'm not entirely sure whether it's actually 8 national championships that they won or whether they participated in 8, but for sure I know that they won 1 or 2 at the very least, so quite a successful group as well. She's going to talk about CU Mehrwertsystem. Dominika could tell you more about it, but I think we can also leave that for Friday. And she's going to talk especially about an issue around financing and patents, which is also something that we discussed in the context of the strategy module in relation to intellectual property and these questions around openness and sort of closeness and protection of your sort of intellectual assets. And the third speaker is going to be Bertram Fischer. He's going to talk about Mikrolandwirtschaft, micro agriculture, which is an initiative in Mannheim that also has, as you already see, sort of an eco and environmental focus. And where there is also an interesting aspect of sort of community and sharing, and yeah, basically an interesting combination, I think, of perspectives on how to address a sustainability challenge in a collective way, right? So I think there's going to be a lot of inspiration, potentially also for your course projects, but also beyond the course, basically sort of motivating you potentially into, going into the direction of maybe founding your own startup, thinking about, how you could develop some of the ideas that you already started off developing in the course projects for the future. So I hope and think this is going to be an exciting round of insights that you're going to get. And obviously, we'd encourage you to, engage as much in the debate and discussion, questions and answers as you can, right? So that's sort of the projection for what we're going to do in 2 days already on Friday. Okay, so as I said, just a short repetition, and then I'm going to build on where we left off in relation to our idea of impact and impact measurement. I just wanted, because that's also going to be one of the sort of key pillars in what you're going to do in the working session in relation to your course project, is really thinking about, how can I apply this idea of a PICO to my own course project? What exactly are the participants? What are the stakeholders that we are addressing? What exactly is the intervention, right? So really forcing you to think about what kind of activities are you doing, and also how are they different from, what's been there before, but also how do they interrelate potentially with, partners, if you think about the strategy modules. So is there something distinct that only comes through by the collaboration that you're initiating? Are there different types of interventions potentially, right? So in relation to some of the course projects, we've been discussing this idea of, maybe there's a primary kind of thing that you're doing and then a secondary kind of thing. There might be two different things that are quite balanced. But this is, I think, important for you to think about, what is it that we're actually bringing to the table? And this third aspect is to think about some kind of a comparator. We're going to see in a little bit that the comparator can be very different things. It can be sort of a general population. It can be some kind of a specific population in a sense, right? Another customer group, another, age group, another consumer group. And there's different ways in which this comparator can be designed in order to really make sure that whatever you see as a change and as an impact is really attributable to your activities, basically, right? And then the fourth question is that of outcomes and impacts. Just recall what Mikolai was talking about in relation to this being sort of the most reflexive kind of exercise that you can do, where you really go all the way through and you're really trying to find out sort of this causal impact chain. How do you move from one step to the next, and what is it actually that you're going to address in the end? We also had this this example by the group that is focusing on slow and sustainable fashion. There we were just briefly discussing about this idea that they also want to change social norms of consumption and what's sort of stylish, what people want, and how they basically consume, right? So I think keeping that in mind is going to be very important for you to structure your thinking around, what is the impact that we're creating and how can we specify the different dimensions in relation to this impact. So maybe I can just briefly call on some of you who have already discussed this last time in relation to the political participation platform and sort of this pro-social behavior in school platform, in order to just recall what exactly the PICOs in those specific situations were. And then we're going to follow on with the one that we weren't able to focus on last time, which is the community-oriented housing. So I'll maybe stop the presentation for a second and then try and call upon you once again. It could be the same people that spoke last time. It could be others who are going to feed us back into what the different PICOs basically were in relation to this pro-social behavior intervention and the political participation. Yes, go ahead, Roman.
I think I read the article about the political, how was it called? Abgeordnetenwatch, I think.
Yeah.
And the participants there were basically the people using the website. Mm-hmm. So everyone who was interested in politics and wanted to have a look into what people are actually doing, maybe next to their political career and stuff like that. So the intervention was basically the website itself, mm-hmm. So that people have the chance to look at these things and get deeper insight into German politics. The comparator were basically the general population. So it was compared to I think the general interest of people in politics itself and the and the interest of people using this website. Obviously, it was higher for the people using this website. And the outcome, actually, I don't really remember what was kind of the bottom line.
But you already mentioned one aspect in relation to being interested in politics, these kinds of issues, also engaging or interacting basically with members of parliament was another outcome, for instance. But yeah, that's a very good sort of description of the setting, where the comparator, as I said, in this case was actually the general population, right? There was no kind of control group that I could have recruited. There's actually not even an option of actually sort of doing this, right? So how would I have recruited someone who's not using something, right? So I would have needed to do some kind of a representative survey of my own, which would just have been basically impossible to do practically, right? So whenever you think about your course project as well, think about what is the default in a sense, right? So if we weren't there with our with our innovation, what would people do? Or is there something that is really comparable to this? And can we use that in order to see, do we make a difference or don't we make a difference? Thanks very much, Roman. Is there someone else willing to share on the pro-social behavior case in schools? I don't recall who did that last time. Be brave and step in. Was that Selena? I'm not entirely sure. Did Selena talk about it, or was that someone else? Yeah, please.
Yeah, so it was me.
Okay.
But I don't entirely recall the article, but I think I do remember that it was about I think violence in schools, or like bad behavior in schools. So the participants, the group, were the students that were like trying out a new program, and then the intervention was kind of the new program. I think there was something called With Respect, to like
exactly, yeah,
teach the students a different way of dealing with their anger problems. And then there wasn't really a control group, I recall that, but there were kind of like interviews were made with students to like kind of assess the impact that the program had on them, but there was not an actual like control group to compare the results.
Yeah, exactly. So the idea was, in this case, because it was a qualitative study and one that was really looking at the process, that sort of this kind of probing and this kind of research was really going into deeply into, was there some kind of a change? What was that change like? Was it caused, or did you feel it was caused by participating in this Respect program? Was it caused by something else, right? That means in this way, you can really try and sort of decipher, is there a change at all? And if there's a change, is that change related to what we've been doing, or does it come from somewhere else, right? And through this in-depth qualitative approach, it was actually the case that we didn't really need, or I didn't really need some kind of a comparison, because it was not a one-off kind of comparison where you do an assessment before and after and then compare the groups, but really something where you were trying, or where I was trying to get behind the process and understand, whether there was a change or not. That is also an option in depending on, what you're talking about. Again, taking up this example of the social norms, of course, you can come up with some kind of a questionnaire, and at the same time, you could also look more deeply into, a smaller number of cases, a smaller number of people, but then, try and understand what, the product that you're providing, or in this case, the app that you're providing, is actually doing to the minds of the people, right? So did some kind of behavioral patterns change? Were there some kinds of obstacles that you were pushing out of the way, that you brought that you removed, that made it easier for people to assume a sustainable consumption pattern, basically, right? Okay, so following on from that, I would like to cover the third intervention, or the third study that we didn't have a chance to focus on yet. And I would like to do that in a bit more of a systematic and also in a graphical way. So I think also this, using these kinds of tables can give you quite a good idea also in relation to your own work, how exactly some kind of an impact assessment design would look like, right? Recall also what Mikolai was talking about with a SMART framework. Things need to be sort of measurable, that they need to be, relevant to your specific organizational activities, and so on, right? So really coming up with some kind of a neat, and as I call it, measurement design here, in relation to how you would want to make sure that the impact that you're creating actually comes from your particular intervention, your organizational activity, right? So in this case, I was looking at community-oriented housing, and I had quite a neat comparator in this case, which was people living in assisted living, right? So basically, there's an idea that those are two different kinds of interventions, where the community-oriented housing is much more, as the name says, community-oriented, focused on self-activation, bringing people together, letting them handle their own problems, letting them or encouraging them to engage for the community. Whereas assisted living has a strong service component, where you basically move into some kind of a new living environment, and whenever there's problems or whenever you need some kind of support, there's a service that you can then call upon, basically, to settle that, right? And so the idea about main impacts or main outcomes basically is this stronger social network. And the specific measures that I was using, you see down here, are things like, the number of social contacts, not only the number itself, but also the frequency of encounters, the intensity of relationships, the importance of relationships, but also things like trust or participation in the in sort of this living environment, right? And you also see that this obviously was a quantitative study, where I had a group of people living in community-oriented housing and another group of people living in assisted living, which served as the control group. And this is basically the idea about the participants, which I call population here, right? So I'm not using the PICO terminology. I actually use the original table that I had, where you sort of PICO came in a bit later also in my own thinking. And I think it's a nice exercise to sort of tease out this information of the PICO here, right? So what I call population here is basically the participants, right? So they have a certain age threshold and some kind of other criteria that make sure that basically the people that I was surveying were in need of some kind of support, right? So it doesn't make sense to potentially, compare people that for one reason or another just moved into this kind of living facility, are potentially much younger and very fit, with people who really need some kind of assistance, right? And what you also see here is that what you would do is also look at some potential secondary effects, but the main thing is really the core measures, right? So the idea now, when you're going into your group working sessions, which we're going to do in 5 minutes or so, is really think about, what are the core dimensions that we're going to affect? What would be potential ways of assessing those? Are we going to approach them in quantitative or qualitative way? And how many people would we need to, address? How are we going to reach out to them? Is it going to be an online survey? Does it need to be a paper-based survey? Are we going to do interviews? How do we make sure that we really have some kind of an impact on the societal challenge, on the sustainability challenge that we're trying to address? This is just a brief overview of all three, where you can see that this is a potentially huge spread in terms of, how you actually do this, right? So one of the studies, or two of the studies, were quantitative. The other one was qualitative, with a minor quantitative component. You see the participants here, right? Very different citizens and politicians of all ages, basically. In this case, it was older students in school, and in this case, it was older people, right? So it's very important to recall this idea of the COVID vaccination, that you are very specific on what you're testing at this particular moment, basically, and potentially you have two target groups, right? Then you will need to think about two sort of different impact measurement designs in order to actually get it, right? Then the intervention be quite specific on what is it, right? So it is this RESPECT program, which Selina correctly mentioned, but what are the core features, right? What they were doing was mainly working with boxing exercises and video work. And so this is supposed to be the triggers that are getting you to the impact, right? And then there's also a range of things that can happen in relation to comparative, right? So sometimes you have a neat kind of thing that you can compare it to, such as assisted living. you either have, you don't need it because you're really looking into the process, basically, right? When you have some kind of qualitative approach there, then, that enables you to track the process. So you don't really need this insight with a control group. And sometimes the control group is basically the entire population, right? And then there's different kinds of, dimensions and indicators that you would want to look at, the outcomes or impacts. And also in those cases, be quite, precise and at the same time also focused, right? So you can always expand the list to almost eternity when you sort of broaden up your perspective too much. It's important to sort of focus it down and identify the central components that you're going to assess in this impact measurement design, right? Okay, just to close off before, I would like to show you some kind of a reflexive video of, how those different impact chains relate to each other. We were talking about the theory of change. The video is going to show you that there might be different pathways that you are actually pursuing simultaneously. And I think it brings all of the concepts that we were talking about together, so that you can then go into your working groups and use those. This slide is just basically to tell you that there are some, very different kinds of methods which you can use in order to, think about impact and assess the impact. And the main message here is not, you need to know the details of all of those, right? So we're not in a measurement, a specific measurement course. We're not in sort of development economics or something like that. It really is the core message here is the method you basically choose, or the strategy you choose in order to assess the impact that you're having, needs to fit your organization, needs to fit your innovation, right? So always think from this sustainability challenge. This is the challenge. This is what we want to achieve, and how do we make sure that we're the ones achieving it? And what exactly are we achieving, right? So is it part of this? Are we mitigating the problem? Are we solving the problem entirely? What are the dimensions that we're addressing? What are some of the dimensions that we're excluding for one reason or another, right? Okay, so to close this off, and then just a few further reflexive remarks, and then you can jump into your working groups. I would like to show you this as some kind of a wrap up and an example also in relation to nebenan.de, which is yet another organization that we were working on basically in the ERMOOC, which gives you some more examples, of what relevant dimensions are, and also how these different steps interrelate with each other, right? So it goes back to the model that Nikolai was showing you. It implements this idea of what exactly is the PICO that you have here, what exactly are the impact chains, what is the theory of change, and how do those different steps interconnect, right? So I will stop sharing the presentation and move to the video. And after we've done that, just a few additional reflections, and then you can jump into your working groups. So let me just switch the sharing to the browser, and let me know if you hear this okay. I'm going to tune up the volume some more, and we should be okay, but let me know if you don't hear anything. The sheer magnitude of impact measurement tools that exist makes it harder rather than easier to apply impact measurement in the best possible way. That is why you need to move from impact measurement as a methodology to impact measurement as a strategy. This applies whether you are an impact investor or whether you want to assess the impact that your organization is creating. How to best do this is at the heart of this video. Every sound assessment of impact, and actually the very design of an impact organization, should start with a systems analysis, in particular as regards the root causes of the social problem the enterprise seeks to address. Once we have mapped the system and identified the causes, ventures would formulate what we call a theory of change, which contains a greater vision and a more fine-grained operational strategy of what the venture wants to do about the problem. In a second step, ventures define and clarify their activities, which usually comprise many things. It could be the provision of a service or the manufacturing of a product, but also awareness-raising activities by which the venture wants to create social change. So far, we have only looked at what the venture is like and what it does. In a third step, we start thinking about what the venture has delivered to its target groups. Outputs, just as activities, will always comprise many things, such as the number of trainings provided or the amount of lobbying performed. For example, measured by the number of policy papers published or the number of meetings with policymakers. The fourth step is the most challenging one. This is where change makers actually ask themselves, have I changed anything? What exactly was it, and by how much has it changed? This could relate to increased levels of tolerance or improved living conditions. This stage is sometimes referred to as impacts, but it could also be called attributable social outcomes, that is, improvements for the target group that can be related to the activities of an organization. Let's go into an example. Nebenan.de is a neighborhood support platform. Among the many activities they are performing is a buy local initiative, community initiatives meant to bring people living in the same neighborhood together, or the provision of mutual support among neighbors. Let's say the platform matches older people who need support in daily activities with young families. One of many outputs might be the number of times the older person has received assistance with their shopping. And this in turn might lead to a number of outcomes like an increased feeling of being supported, but such support could even lead to friendship. The main message here is that in the complex social system of society, activities don't translate neatly into indicators, and one activity might have several outcomes. The main challenge and task of an impact analysis is to prioritize what is most important and keep the analysis lean and manageable, while also accounting for multiple impact chains and kinds of evidence to prove impact has really occurred. For this, it can be helpful to realize that there is an area where organizations do and explain, while there also needs to be a space for deeper reflection, which you could call plan and learn. The second main message here is that for many social ventures, it is the things that are difficult to measure which matter most. Now, in relation to Nebenan.de, but really in relation to any organization, there are three different options of how you can go about assessing impact. First, you can choose to be agnostic. As long as the organization is running smoothly and stably, you wouldn't even go about gathering any impact-related data. Option 2 is the get facts type of analyst, who would ask, what has happened? This question can be answered by looking for hard facts, such as the numbers of events or users mentioned before. The third option is that of the impact analyst, who would ask, why have things happened? This can only be answered by getting in touch with and talking to people, for example, by setting up a primary survey or conducting interviews. As we move from left to right, that is from the agnostic position to the analytic position, the effort that needs to be put into assessing impact will obviously increase. What we tend to forget, however, is that the risk of impact not happening decreases at the same time. So the first lesson here is that impact measurement is not only a cost factor, but a powerful means of managing risk. To do impact measurement properly, it is more important to take some key considerations into account rather than know about all available measurement tools. A sound measurement strategy should recognize that phases where you plan and learn and where you do and explain are equally important and revolving. And also that while input, output, outcome, impact models can help you structure your thinking, you will most likely accelerate your own impact when you choose to embrace complexity in your impact analysis. Okay, I'll stop this here. I think sort of the main message is that you should re-recognize many of the elements that we've already seen. We've talked about the theory of change. We've talked about the different impact chains. We've seen the example of the UTZ scheme, for instance, and seen, how the different pathways basically relate to each other, how they also differ from each other. We've talked about this idea of sort of PICO, bringing it to the sort of most important elements, defining the stakeholders that you're addressing, and then really sort of deducting the different elements that you would need to assess in order to make sure that the claims of impact that you're making are really sound, right? So just one set of reflections in relation to this before you can then jump into applying this in relation to your own course projects. So as I already mentioned briefly, here we go. Actually, one of the questions that we had in relation to the UTZ theory of change was, what exactly are the indicators? How do you put this into practice? What is the operationalization? And that certainly is, a difficult task. And at the same time, what we've also seen is that maybe conceptualizing, really thinking about it in a strategic way, contextualizing, what you're actually doing, what you might be comparing it to, what the key dimensions are, what the main stakeholders are, is actually the bigger challenge than then really coming up with some kinds of indicators that you could then test, basically, right? There's tons of tools, impact measurement tools, such as the social return on investment and others, which we haven't even really touched upon. And I think we actually don't need to touch upon. The main thing is really to give you some kind of a repertoire of strategic tools rather than, just things that you can take and apply in order to, think about what is the design that we would need to come up. And that's also, that what we're expecting you to do in relation to both the presentations as well as the assignment is not to, give us, a huge list of indicators that you will be assessing. It is more about, what is the line of thinking that is behind it? Do the steps and do the focuses that you're setting make sense? What are the key dimensions and how are you going to address those? And so this, I think, should help you implement the impact as the key pillar in developing and improving the solutions, right? Because you always have this, what you've also seen in the video, this check back with the sustainability challenge, right? So if you, move ahead and all of a sudden you just recognize, well, we're only talking about indicators anymore, but are those really the most important indicators? Are those actually dimensions that matter in relation to the sustainability challenge that we're addressing? So you really have this kind of loop that helps you, assess these kinds of interlinks and the different pathways that you would want to cover if you want to come up with an impact assessment design. And the last message here is there are different levels of complexity, and obviously we want to be a bit more at the complex end. So we don't want to only list the number of users, but we also want to see, what exactly do you expect the users to change in relation to their behavior or their attitudes, right? So I'll stop talking here. If you have any questions for the group, please feel free to raise those. And otherwise, I suggest we're going to put you into your groups in a little bit, and there you'll have enough room to discuss. Maybe, as ever, we're going to give you at least 5 minutes for you to settle in and to start the discussion, and then the mentors are going to visit you in your groups. I suggest, because we always run a little bit out of time in the end, because we discuss more than we have time for, I would suggest you take half an hour in order to work on this. Again, there's not an explicit expectation, right? So we're not sort of saying, this is the blueprint and this is how it should look like. You should be thinking about the theory of change. You should be thinking about these ideas of, what's behind the SMART framework. What do these things that we're coming up with need to be? What exactly is the PICO? And also, how does that all matter to the sustainability challenge? That's sort of the most important thing. And then you can come up with, well, basically whatever you like, right? It could be some kind of a table, which as the one that I presented in relation to the community-oriented living, gives you sort of a neat overview of the design. It could be more of a process perspective where you're trying to outline the different impact chains that you have, but then you're a bit more specific in relation to what exactly the dimensions are going to be. So you have quite some freedom in what you do, and I think you have all the tools that you will need to do it. In case there are direct questions, just feel free to pose those now. Maybe we'll wait another 20 or 30 seconds because it's always a bit of a tough call to get an immediate reaction. And after that, we're going to put you into your groups and the mentors are going to be with you as well. Okay, that does not seem to be an immediate question. So Tina, maybe you could open the breakout rooms and the groups could go into the rooms. And as I mentioned at the very beginning, one of our interests would also be to find 2 more groups who are willing to give it a go on the 11th. I should maybe mention that obviously we're going to go easier on the ones that are starting on the 11th than on the 18th. So maybe that's a bit of an incentive to find 2 more groups to go for the 11th instead of the 18th. We have 3 sort of more or less voluntarily confirmed groups that are going to go for the 11th. Again, take it as an opportunity and as also getting potentially a bit more leeway, potentially not, being too influenced by what others have been doing, being a bit more liberal. And obviously we will also take into account that you have had a little, well, not a little, but, a whole week less time to prepare it, right? So I think those that are really, daring enough to go for the 11th, will have more benefits, I guess, than disadvantages, although obviously we won't chastise the groups that are going for the 18th, right? But just to give you an overview of the situation right now, I hope we will be able to fill this last spot that we still have open for the 11th. I hope you can see my schedule. So the ones that we have noted down for the 11th. So let's maybe just do that briefly, and then we can then we can go into contents. Is group number 1 on SDG 16. That's the main mentor there is Dominika, and then my 2 groups, which is group 5 and group 8, will be going for the 11th. And then there's a little, more or less willingness or also practical constraints for some of the groups that are still on the 18th. But ideally, we would like to have 4-4 instead of 3-5. I think that's just not, very reasonable to do, to squeeze the time that we have on the 18th. So if there's a group where we can either settle some kind of practical issues, or that, just now feels super inspired of still filling this spot. It doesn't need to be the 2nd, right? So we haven't really scheduled any kind of, who goes first and who goes last, but who would be willing to go for the 11th, that would be much appreciated. So maybe you've all seen it now. So if there's one group willing to make that move, I think you should either sort of let us know now, and otherwise we'll need to basically sort it out by tomorrow so that everyone knows knows where they stand. And please feel free to use the session on the 6th on Friday to settle any kind of issues that you still might have, right? As I said, we're going to allocate some time for discussions about the presentations anyway. If you feel you need a bit more sort of discussion time with the mentors, or even within the bigger group, then we can certainly add another 10 or 15 minutes at the end, right? As long as that's fine for you. It also doesn't, need to concern the whole group, but we'll make sure that, you feel confident enough to go. And those are also groups, where we as mentors really were very very clear that, it should not be an issue, and the groups should be ready by the 11th because they've made very good progress, right? So I'll leave it here. I'll open it up for any kinds of questions or any, spontaneous volunteers that there might be. And otherwise, as I said, we're going to try and settle, some remaining issues, and hopefully give you an overview by tomorrow before we meet on Friday. Yeah, Zlatica, please.
Yeah, I would like to just ask when we will be presenting even the 11th, then is there like a specific time set for it?
Yeah, I mean,
or it will be just like within this window of our class?
If there is a certain time that would suit you, that we can surely manage that. if this is the question. I mean, if you can be there at the beginning but have to leave earlier, or if you will be a bit late because of another course that you're having or something like that, then we can surely allocate certain time slots that fit you well. So this wouldn't be a problem.
Exactly. As I said, if you have any kinds of preferences in relation to the exact timing, we can certainly accommodate for those, right? So the idea, as we said several times, is 15 minutes of presentation time, roughly. It can be a bit less, can be a bit more. Again, take into account, we're not trying to tick boxes, right? But, if this is a super striking presentation and it only takes 10 minutes, we won't care. We won't sit there and then ask you, where are the remaining 5 minutes, right? And then there's going to be 5 minutes of Q&A, clarifications, potentially a little bit of discussion. So that we have sort of 80 minutes of presentations. If we have four groups presenting, and then that still gives us 10 minutes of leeway if someone takes a bit longer, or if you have a more intense discussion. So I think that should be the sort of your goal. And also, I told my groups as well, please don't break it down to an exact number of minutes, right? So if you're 5 people, you're not supposed to speak for 3 minutes exactly, right? So it just, try and share it in the way that it makes sense, right? So you could do it, I don't know, both simultaneously. Someone's doing, I don't know, some kind of acting part of, you can be very creative, and that doesn't need to be, it doesn't need to be split equally. We also have a very good sense of how you're working in the groups through the mentorship. So don't worry too much, and it's going to be some kind of a shared sort of group grade where we also now have the feeling that the groups are, that people are contributing really. Those who were disengaged to some extent, I think, are not part of the course anymore. So no worries in relation to that, right? Just to reassure you, there's not going to be any unfairness in relation to that, right? So if we don't have any further questions or spontaneous volunteers, which I'm still hoping for a little bit, we can hopefully settle the issue soon. And otherwise, I would like to just call upon maybe 1 or 2 groups, as we usually do, in relation to coming up with some kind of an impact design and telling us about how you would be going about assessing that. Yeah, Roman, please.
Yeah, I will just quickly share my screen so everybody can see what I'm talking about. I hope you can see it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this is kind of our theory of change. So our vision is, for those who are not perfectly informed about our product and our SDG goal. So our vision is making green cities the new normal. Therefore, we want to have kind of 2 initiatives, one of which is our social product and one of which is our social program. So we have this kind of little 2x2 matrix here. So the input for our social product is we want to create a platform where you can rent, share, and create urban gardening spaces. This product includes several features, for example, an urban garden modules feature, where we kind of put together plants, for example, who are resilient in a special kind of climate, or like we say, you want to have, let's say, fruits in your garden. So this plant will fit your climate and will fit your light situation and will fit your specific situation. For example, if you have a vertical, not just a horizontal roof, but a little bit vertical, this plant will be perfect for you. So another feature would be, for example, a feature to measure potential garden space and get recommendations what to plant on this in this space. So this is kind of our social product, and the output would be to use space in cities effectively. So that is something we find is not yet done as of right now. So for our social product, we want to create community spaces to share, learn, and connect. We call these urban hubs, where we bring people together to learn about urban gardening, where we bring people together to share their ideas and to find out about new trends, about new possibilities to make urban gardens even more suitable for the urban environment. that we have right now. So there, our output would be education on sustainable living and urban gardens in general. So this leads us to our goals we have. So the goals which are part of the vision of making green cities the new normal. So one of which is reducing the urban heat island effect. So we for example saw that especially elder people are struggling with heat in cities, and this just applies to the West. In all other cities, so if we look more southwards, heat is a problem in general, not just for all elder people. And we want to reduce basically heat island effect in cities, which can be measured by the average temperature, or just the physical well-being of citizens, for example, with heat deaths. We want also to improve the air quality in cities. Also, this is pretty straightforward, measured by the fine dust pollution, CO2 pollution in cities. Creating a livable environment, this is a little bit harder. This could be, for example, measured by the local happiness index as part of surveys, or just the mental well-being of citizens in general. Providing locally produced farm food for citizens. This is actually something that is already done right now. And this could be easily measured by the amount of food produced in kilograms and people's perception of the relevance of green cities. So this kind of sums up our social program, how people really see the need for urban gardening right now. This could be measured by the numbers of members on our platforms and some sort of pop-up evaluations in our platforms or in the hubs. And at this point, I will give it over to Uwe, who will talk a little bit more about our BICO.
Yes, exactly. Can you zoom in a bit?
Yeah,
I don't think people will see it. So yeah, about what we've spoken now. So at the really core of what we do is to start that sort of movement of creating these urban hubs, giving people the opportunity to educate themselves on how to make the city greener and more livable, and thus then achieve the effect of making the city greener, and also providing people with the tool, with a platform where they can rent out spaces, etc. So the participants that might be part of our study would be a representative sample of city inhabitants in cities where we actually offer our services, where we construct such hubs. The intervention, as discussed by Roman in detail, would be the platform, like the social product on the one side, where we provide all these services, and on the other side the community and the education. And the comparator, or the control group, so to speak, would then also be a sample of city inhabitants, maybe in a similar city, so a similar geographical zone and also climate zone, where we actually don't have that service or that education. So we would go into 2 different cities and ask people and try to evaluate their sentiment. And yeah, the outcomes, as also in detail already discussed, would be all the positive effects coming with greener cities. And if we also measure that as described by Roman, then we can draw a connection between people's sentiment and the effects caused by the education on the one hand, and by the real, so to speak, changes of making the city greener.
Thanks very much, both. I think that really is a good example of, how to also sort of complement these different things in terms of the impact chains, the theory of change, also looping it back to the vision, really making sure that what you're keeping track of in terms of performance is really aligned with your vision, and then sort of boiling it down to, who exactly would you address, how would you be addressing those people. Comparators, again, also quite neat thinking in terms of, if I'm comparing it to something, then it needs to be comparable, right? So it would be potentially a city of the same size. It would be, if you're looking at the neighborhood level, it would also be some kind of comparable thing, not too much disparity in terms of, high income neighborhood, low income neighborhood, that kind of thing. That's really good thinking in terms of, the impact measurement design and how it aligns basically with the innovation that you bring in and how that addresses the sustainability challenge. So thanks very much to both of you. Maybe there's another group who would be
Perhaps
willing.
Dominika,
Dominika,
one
please.
point that would be important to me, because this is something that occurred in some of the groups that I visited as well. I would like to sensitize you a little bit on how to use them, the concepts or the models that we, or the tools that we present to you, right? I mean, here, I think it was a great example of how you thought through the different impact chains and what are all the outcomes that your interventions may lead to. So I think it's really great. And you thereby combine two tools, right? So one that was more the IOI model, and then the PICO model. And I think both are valuable and helpful tools. And I just wanted to make the point, but these are not, I mean, tools to use and to fill out, but it's really important that there is a good connection between them, right? And that they are connected to your basic goals and your business model as well. I mean, and I take your example, but I saw that in other groups as well. In the IOI model, you developed quite a lot of indicators on an ecological and social dimension. And in the PICO model, you then focus on some of these, right? And it wasn't quite clear how exactly are the others then measured. And this is fine. You can, I think, develop a broad model and say, okay, some of in the beginning, in particular, you want to focus on measuring some of these, right? And then developing further the measurement approach for selected outcomes that might be most important in the beginning. But yeah, do not use these different models and fill them out and not connect them to your original goals and to your business model. Everything, what we, I think, want to emphasize here, that it has to be a clear line of argumentation, a clear message that makes sense, right? And then to think through how you can actually measure that. Do I have to ask these people in a qualitative manner? Do I have to send a survey or other measurement approaches and possibilities to collect data? But yeah, just a short emphasis on it's more about the reasoning that you're doing than about going into all the details that you could think of in terms of what could be the outcomes.
Fantastic. That's very important to stress, right? And it aligns with what we're always communicating, right? This is not for you to tick off or fill in all of the gaps and the blank spots, right? So actually, this is potentially more of a sign of, you know, confusion or potentially not really getting at the intricate connections between the things, but we really want to see the storyline and how things interconnect, what kind of arguments you're making, what kind of focuses you're setting, also potentially what kinds of things you're just excluding, right, for certain reasons. Okay, all right. So let's call it a day then, and see hopefully most of you on Friday. Bye, everyone.